Today on the CIO Lifeline, we have Brian Lurie from Lurie Enterprises. Brian is a friend and colleague of mine. He's former CIO of Stryker Medical, amongst many other organizations. He's been a guest speaker of the Wharton School of Business and Columbia University, and he's a subject matter expert on today's topic on stress management. This is something we all can relate to. So what do you say we jump right into it? Don't go anywhere.
Thanks. I'm honored to be invited to today's discussion, and it is a topic which cuts across all lines of business, cuts across all professions. It's a human issue that we're really talking about.
The hustle and bustle of today's work environments and the pressures that come with it, being able to have a trusted peer group, someone that you can vent to, not someone you necessarily have to go to because you're looking for an answer or a solution or response. Sometimes you just need people to listen. So today's topic is about stress, managing stress. It's that work-life balance. And when I think back to my previous career, I had a more relaxed memory of it. It just wasn't such a hustle bustle. Maybe it's because of the nature of what positions I've evolved into or grown into over the years. Maybe it's business in general. I'd like to get both of your thoughts on this, but the simple fact of the matter is there's a lot of stress at work, and how you manage it and prevent bringing it home and causing an unwanted ripple effect.
When you think about stress and stress management, which is really, if you will, the antidote to what do we do about stress, it's important to understand its origins. And it goes back as long as humans have existed. I mean, cavemen were stressed when a wild animal was approaching them, and the body viscerally reacts to that. It's actually a chemical reaction. It not only hones their senses, but it particularly focuses them. Now, the good news about focus is that means you can pay close attention and you'll probably react very specifically to that threat. The problem with it is it also creates tunnel vision. And that tunnel vision, because of focus, you're only paying attention to that, can be quite dangerous to your body and dangerous to your effectiveness in solving the stress issue. If you are in a stressful situation, there are things that commonly come up that a lot of folks don't recognize initially. Some of them are physical. Some of them could be, I'm not sleeping. Right? And one of the things with not sleeping is because your brain is trying to protect you against that stress and think about and problem solve the issue. Only what it often does is it's problem solving issues that may be hallucinations or may be worst case scenarios, which may in fact be improbable, but you're thinking about all the potentials to harm you. And that, you would say, was a good thing, except that it in and of itself can be overwhelming. You could actually end up with a situation where you're not solving the issue at all. You're solving the world's problems because you think they may be related. And so focus, to that other point about the human body, is really important. And one of the ways to focus is to be conscious of what's going on and then to take action. And so I've come up with this acronym called R.U.N, which is to first R for recognize, U for understand, and N for neutralize. And so if you can recognize the stress, then delve into what's really happening as opposed to the hallucinations of catastrophizing the worst case scenario, and separate those from reality, and then come up with actions to actually, by practice, know what to do about them, then perhaps you can actually deal with this stress and be effective. And by the way, just to bring it back to your point, the reason that you probably look back on those stresses later as not being such a big deal is because they didn't kill you. But at the moment, they felt like they were going to kill you. And if you look back on the last 5 major events in your life that you thought, oh my God, this could be the end, none of them were. And that's a great lesson for the next stress that comes along.
So I love that R.U.N acronym: recognize, understand, neutralize. Because I've always, in my years, helping people through this, it's the whole respond versus react, right? And it's the three R's for me, respond versus react, and then do a retrospective, right? Because you're going to make mistakes every week. But I got into this habit early on. Every week I look back and say, what did I do that I would do differently in the future? Because you just got to learn from your mistakes. I maybe I knee jerked. I reacted, instead of responding. But then you actually go through that whole visualization, build a new neural pathways, and then when that situation comes up, you respond how you want to.
I love that idea of taking time afterwards to deconstruct what happened. I mean, since you're using our words, let's say reflect upon what actually took place, because in there are the facts versus the emotional aspect of being in the thick of the thing. So, if we look at those three categories that I talked about, if you talk about first recognize, what are the things that happen when you're stressed? Your stomach hurts, you can't sleep, your hands may shake. All of those are early warning signs that you're getting into a place which is beyond your control because your body is taking over from your mind. And the solution here, I will tell you, the real nugget here is that this is a mind game. This is not a physical game, but the evidence of that mind game is physical. And so what happens when your stomach hurts? You go for comfort foods. You go for things that like sugar that aren't good for you, but sugar helps the brain process. And so what happens is your body is reacting and it's doing its natural thing. The thing that humans have that no other animal has is a brain the size that we have that can process and say, no, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to take control of this situation. And I'm then going to try and understand, thus the you in run. I'm going to try and understand what's going on and not fall prey to the physical reaction. And by the way, not just treat the symptoms. I'm not going to just stay away from sugar. I'm going to actually understand what's driving me to want that sugar. By the way, nobody loves a candy bar more than me, right? So I'm not saying don't eat the candy bar. I'm saying understand why you're eating the candy bar while you're chewing on it.
Love it.
And then you've started already, Craig. You're 3 steps ahead of all of us. You've already started to say, no, I'm going to do some reflection afterwards so I can learn from this experience. And that's part of the neutralize. That's part of hey, the next time this comes up, how am I going to handle it differently than I did the last time?
Your mind awareness, it's all about self-awareness in the mind, even mind hacks. Whatever you got to do, like rolling out of bed. I don't know if you ever heard this one. If you go 3, 2, 1, your mind can't fight a reverse countdown to roll out. It's just anything like that you can stack the odds in your favor of being the person you want to be. Not, no ego and all that stuff. Just what are your gifts that you have, and you want to capitalize on that to make the world a better place, right?
I'm tracking with you completely. So that recursive idea, right? It becomes a snowball down the hill to the point where it's out of your control. The antidote to that is coming up with things to put aside the anxiety so that you can then think. I mean, think about the brain power you spend on trying to deal with stress, and all that brain power is not going to the solution, it's going to the symptoms. So, for instance, I recently learned a technique that said if you can't sleep because you're stressed, the best thing, what's happening is your brain is trying to think about all the potential permutations of what could go wrong. So the thing to do is to force your brain to focus on one thing. An apple, let's say. Think about an apple, think about its size, its shape, its texture, and honest to God, this works. It's amazing to me because I was a doubting Thomas that within 5 minutes, you will have calmed your mind because your brain can only focus on one thing, and you're now focusing on this inanimate object. And before you know it, you wake up in the morning saying, I was thinking about apples. What's that all about?
Do you need to have gone through things for a lesson to truly stick? Because I'm listening to this, and to me, I just like being a fly on a wall in this topic. I mean, I got 2 experts in this field, so I'm enjoying this. But then I'm thinking back as Tony, the 13-year-old, the 18-year-old, the 25-year-old, right? I'd listen to my parents give me lessons, and I'd yawn, or what do they know? And it wasn't until I experienced the negatives that the lessons then resonated with me. Is that just a human nature thing? Like Brian, you mentioned it's a chemical reaction. Are human beings simply unable for things to stick until they've experienced what they are in fact battling?
Tony, I think you're onto something really powerful. T.S. Eliot, famous author, used to say, "You don't know the real highs till you've known the real lows."
Yeah,
right.
Yeah.
That how many times in this presidential period that we're in right now are we hearing stories about tough times, and that made me who I am? So your base understanding of, if I've experienced it, it's real for me, and I can do something that is true. But here's what, as a leader, we can do for people relative to that issue. You know that I'm somebody that tells a lot of stories. And you might think I'm just a folksy guy that likes to tell stories. But in reality, what I'm doing is I'm relating a situation where I have had an experience and a result. And I'm not doing it so that you should then say, "Oh, Brian gets it." I'm doing it so that you can say, "What in my life parallels that?" And if you can come up with your own story because you're thinking about it during my storytelling, then it became real for you, and then you own it at that point. So yes, an experience absolutely cements it in the brain. Let's think about it physically again. If you touch a hot surface and you burn yourself, you're not likely to touch that same surface again without being more careful.
Amen.
Yeah.
Someone told me that was hot, but they were full of shit until I burned my finger. Yeah, exactly right.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Hey,
No,
so I have to digress, just a pivot, just a minute, Craig. Because I'm listening to Brian, and I got to tell you something. When it comes to state of mind and staying positive and having that self-reflection and control, Brian and I, made sure that this topic was okay because it really hits home for me. But Brian went through, he had a liver transplant, and just through the grace of God, he found a match within his own family. And when you do your retrospective on this, you realized that if it wasn't for that type of match, I don't know, we'd be doing this episode today, right? So it's hard to think about. But the simple fact of the matter is, knowing during that period of uncertainty and knowing what was coming, he still did the water coolers with the IT group. He was still a mentor to everybody. He was still a positive influence. And I shared this with my wife, and she's like, "How in the hell can this guy function knowing what's ahead of him?" I can't answer that. I mean, Brian I'd love for you to reflect on that, share that experience, because I think there's a lesson in that. Now, fast forward, here he is, young liver. He's shed some years and probably will be doing this for the next 50 years. But anyway.
Yeah, so thanks, Tony, for bringing that up. I'm very open about it. It was, in my case, a DNA issue that caused the liver to fail. But the reality was it was failing, and I was given a 3-year sentence, which now, post-transplant, is a 30-year sentence. So I remembered saying numerous times that I'm the luckiest guy on the planet. And I said that before the liver transplant. And I said it because my family rallied around me. My business gave me all the support that I needed. My colleagues were there for me. I mean, how lucky are you to have that sort of community around you? And then afterwards, after the transplant, when I lost 30 years that I had gained, right? I mean, all of a sudden, I'm now feeling like I'm 30 instead of 60. I said to people, "I'm the luckiest guy in the world." And they said, "Well, of course you are, because you got a new liver." And I said, "No, I was the luckiest guy in the world before I got the liver."
So how do you separate? Because you have two families, right? Your nuclear family is priority number one, but you have your work family, your work life. I mean, that's what pays the bills, and that's what helps provide. For those that are just going through a high amount of stress, how do you walk away from that, or walk in the front door and not bring that burden into your own four walls at home?
Another insightful question. So first of all, if you take sleep out of the equation, you're at work more than you're at home. which seems pretty crazy if we said that priority one was your home life, right? But that is the reality of most Americans, is that you're actually, in terms of awake time, you're spending more time with work than you are with your family, particularly in the earliest part of your career. And for some of us who love our work, it's just as bad later on. So with that said, it's important to understand that these are two really important drivers, especially as you go up the ladder of society, in terms of pressures. And I think the trick here, and I don't mean to simplify it in any fashion, the trick here is to understand what it is that's filling your bucket with each of those things. What it is, what interactions do you have that make you feel richer afterwards as opposed to poorer? There's a Harry Chapin song that talks about at the end of the day, when you've worked really hard, you're either energized from the work or you're exhausted from the work. You know, there's some days when you say, I should have stayed in bed today. And there are other days when you had a completely exhausting day and you're ready to go for the next challenge, right? And so the difference between those, once again, and it goes back to the run analogy, is the understanding, the you part of it, is understanding what it is that drives me. And did I actually, number one, spend my time on that? And number two, was I successful? Did I move the ball down the field? Tony, you know, I've used with you an analogy of in prioritization, because you can't do everything that your brain thinks could be done. It's important to put the big rocks in the jar first. Otherwise, later, you know, if you start with the sand or the water, the big rocks don't fit anymore. But if you start with the big rocks, you'll get it all in, or that which is necessary. And so it's important to understand what you're doing, plan your work, and then work your plan. And so many times what I love that Craig said was he actually takes that final step, which is reflection back. So the next time he does it differently, hopefully a little bit better, right? And so if you think about this as a cycle, plan your work your plan, reflect on it so you do it better the next time. After a while, this cycle becomes a process improvement activity. You get better and better over time.
Yeah, the whole reflection and visualization. So it actually builds new neural pathways in your brain. So you almost you can respond faster, you know, versus somebody hits you, you hit them back. That's a reaction, right? Versus I'm going to think, do I really want to hit them back? You know, I had a big eye opener. Have you ever read the book Atomic Habits, Brian?
I have not.
Oh my gosh, it's an eye opener, and it's right with in line with what you're saying. It's like identity versus goals, right? I mean, instead, you know, and in building these new habits, so you fulfill the identity you want to be, right? And instead, like I compete in marathons. No, I'm a runner. You know, because I kind of had when I sold my first company. Yeah. I was 28 when I started it, CEO, IT, grew it up pretty big, sold it, and I'm like, crap, who am I? You know, because my identity was so tied to being this CEO and tech guy, and I'm like, now what? You know, so I went on a deep dive to figure that out, but Atomic Habits is just a great one because you build these new habits toward what you want to be.
Prior to building the home I'm in now, I was in a I'll just say smaller home in an established neighborhood, not a lot of property to maintain. And I'd come home, and of course I'd have family time, and my wife's early to bed. Kids were empty nesting at that point. You know, so I have this huge block of time where I was just like, wow, you know, something was missing. And now that we're in this new place, there's 1,000 things to do at any time. And so I think back, and, you know, the takeaway for me is that having a hobby or having distractions that are fun for you are important, because it doesn't matter how stressful the workday is. I like, Craig, you mentioned we're having fun, but you also talk about the crap factor, right? It's like 80%, there's 20% crap factor. I mean, if you're having fun 80% of the time, you have it really good, right? You know,
I have a business partner who's quite successful. He once created and ran the world's largest producer of mobile applications, and he had decided I think he was an entrepreneur for sure, but I think he had started 10 successful companies, and he said, "I'm done. I'm going to retire." And a few months later, I noticed that he was involved with another business. And I called him and I said, Bill, what are you doing? You told me you retired. He said, yeah. He said, there's only so many times you can redesign the kitchen.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because somebody who is wired that way is never going to be satisfied just hanging out at the beach.
Where's your head on the purpose factor? Because I think purpose and your why keep you moving, right? I mean, I think if once you lose your purpose, man, even if you retire, you still need to have a purpose.
First of all, I love the question, because it reminds me, and Tony's heard me say this many times, that as leaders, we don't do information technology. We do people that do information technology. And so this getting into the psyche of what drives us is hugely important. I've often said, hire really smart people, support them, and then get the hell out of their way. They'll do great things. And so this idea that we should focus on what some people call softer things, I personally think they're the most important things, because softer makes them sound less important. But this idea that you're raising is just another component of that, is that we, in fact, need to have a reason why we get up in the morning. I will tell you that during my illness, when I was getting to the point where functioning was in and of itself a challenge, my water cooler event, my coaching sessions, Tony thinks it was wonderful that I did those. It kept me alive.
I love that. The only thing I wrote down when we were talking earlier is that whole success to fulfillment, right? I mean, that journey when people are working hard and they're successful, our significance, people say success to significance. Now you're giving back, you're making the world a better place, right?
But let me do a sub comment on that. That is something that I wish I had realized earlier in my career that I didn't realize till later. I would have been happier if I had. And that is, you are successful at the moment where you are, as opposed to I'm reaching for success. That each step along the way, you can be successful at that step and feel good about that success. Most of us spend our time with a long-term goal in mind, and we're not going to be happy till we get there. Only we find out when we get there, we're not happy because we weren't happy along the route.
Gosh, dang, that goes right back to that atomic habits of I finished a marathon versus I'm a runner. It just,
yeah, exactly.
It's
perfect.
It's keep celebrating every day, celebrate every milestone, not when you achieve, because so many the runner analogy, they finished the marathon. It's like, now what? Yeah.
And the flip side of that is when you're halfway through the marathon and you trip and fall, the world has not ended.
Yeah. Yep. That's it's all perspective at that point, right?
And that's an example of learning by experience. If you're someone in the workplace environment and you're seconds away from a moment you're going to regret, what's some coaching advice to make sure they don't go over that edge?
Yeah. And I think to your earlier point, Tony, when you failed, you learn those lessons. And so if you can tie it back to an experience that you've had, that becomes your reminder for the next situation.
We started this out with making the world a better place kind of thing. But in my mind, you get people happy at work in their natural strengths zone, whether it's strength finders, whatever. Then they don't go home mad. So now the house is happy, the community's happy, and then the world gets happy, right? I mean, it's just, you don't go home with all that.
Guess what? Back to our topic at hand. What better way to reduce stress than to be successful?
Oh, right on. And
right? Because when the S hits the fan, and it always does, when you're feeling successful, you'll manage through that.
Oh, we curse on this channel. I promise you.
You're goddamn right.
So
I was raised a certain way.
Yeah.
I missed that lesson. But I maybe twisted a little bit. When you're successful, you're happy, but when you're satisfied, you're happy. I guess it depends on how you define success, right? Because I could be hitting walls all day long at work, but I'm surrounded by a good team and positive energy. That is success too, right?
So, in fact, noodle this for a moment. You're happy because you're successful, or you're successful because you're happy?
Ah, I like that.
And I would argue by far it's the latter.
Absolutely.
The only way to be
Yeah.
successful is to go into it with a happy attitude.
And the other way, I know this is fun. Success to fulfillment. Are you fulfilled?
Yeah, I love that component.
You know, because success kind of has
What's in it for me?
it kind of has a finite, and we need to be playing that infinite game, right? You know, it's just keep things going. You know, and Simon Sinek has a great book, Finite versus Play the Infinite versus Finite Game.
Yes,
my
absolutely.
gosh, you know, you change your mind, and it's like, oh, I am feeling fulfilled. Yes, and
you know what we do when a sales rep meets their quota? We raise it. That's right. So we take the cognitive horizon of success and constantly make it unreachable.
Terrible. Yeah.
The days of December being a time to unwind and relax, think about family, in my head, they're gone. It's hey, great year. What are you gonna do for me next year? You know,
so
great quarter, record breaking. Let's break it again. It's like, God damn it! Why can't we just celebrate the fact that we're successful, and that why does that bar have to constantly keep getting raised? Now all the capitalists in the world are going to throw darts at me.
Greed, for lack of a better word, is good. Greed is right.
They are, and by the way, part of success as defined by the U.S. is growth, right? So it's hard to say I've got a company and I don't want it to grow, but I want it to be successful. So here's the trick in that. The trick in that is it's not that we're not having December anymore. It's we're not having Wednesday, August 21st anymore. It's that today we should take a moment to reflect on last week and yesterday and this morning. And if you do that, you're going to have Christmas every day of the year.
Yeah. You know, Tony, that's why when we start our L10s, the personal professional best, celebrate what happened good last week.
Yeah.
You know,
that's right.
And then we do our quarterly rocks, to Brian's point. You got to focus on the big ones. Our mind thinks in 90 days, but we got to reflect weekly and share.
Adding to that, they're building on that, is understanding your role in the larger community. That your purpose is not just to feel good about yourself. Your purpose is to feel good about sharing. And therefore, how can I help the entity through my contribution be something greater?
And that's what I like, and helps with a very stressful day. It's something that you're coming home to, or something you look forward to. Just like when my kids were younger and I helped run, but I helped coach a travel basketball team. Well, there were 3 months out of the year. I don't care what was happening at work or how stressful it was. I looked forward to 5:30, 6 o'clock, whatever the time was, coming home, having dinner, and then heading out to practice and being amongst the kids that just want to have fun and looking forward to the tournament the following weekend. There was always a purpose. So having that hobby, having that, and of course you enjoy spending time with your spouse, but having other things, other purpose, it helps dissolve the stress that you had 8 hours prior.
If we understand what the stress is, all of those things that you do, like going out to that game, help you put in perspective that stress that was going to kill you earlier in the day. Maybe it's not.
We danced around this a couple times, but you just simply have to fall down before things to make yourself all the stronger. I mean, the shit I did as a young employee, the voicemails I would leave the boss, the outbursts I would have, the tables I slapped saying something that I can't retract. I don't think of those all the time. I mean, there's events 20 years ago I still feel bad about today, but that's what makes you stronger. Sometimes you have to fall down.
Right. I mean, and the premise, I used to think that was selfish, but like on an airplane, when they say put your oxygen mask on first so you can help other people, right? If you die, you can't help anybody else, right? So it's the same thing. So before, because I used to run out of the house, and then I was kind of like, I had this animosity, like I'm working hard, but I'm not taking care of me. So have it just, even if it's 15 to 30 minutes of just center time, I feel good. I'm inputting me. I'm doing what fulfills me in the morning. And then you go then you just go spread.
I had a mentor once say to me, do I take Muse Time? And I said, Muse Time? He said, yeah, time where you sit back, put your feet up on the desk, don't take any phone calls, don't talk to anybody, and just think. And it doesn't matter what you're thinking about. And I looked at him like he was crazy. I said, do you have any idea what my calendar looks like? Like, this is not possible. And it wasn't till I actually tried it that I realized it made me more productive. And I solved problems during that hour that I never would have solved.
Oh, just free from input in this. Our brains aren't made to process continuous input like we're getting today. So just free from input. Sometimes I'll just go work out. I won't listen to anything. My brain just goes, and you just let it wander wherever it wants to wander. Right.
Like I'm a golfer. I love the game of golf. There's times just taking an hour and go hit some balls in the range. It's just me and nature and just in my own thoughts. Just that brief distraction, or you just take a walk in the woods. One thing I love about both of you, and you've done that for me over the years, is that all the stress that comes with the day job, and it's the check-ins. And Craig, you're really good at this. Like, hey, it's been a few days. Just want to make sure how you doing, right? And Brian, you've done this too, and Craig. I get rambling about what's going on. It's like, hey, how's Elena doing? My wife, all that work. We're gonna get to that in a minute. But what I care about right now is how are you feeling? How are things going?
I've often said that you're okay if work is crazy and home is good, and you're okay if home is crazy and work is good. You can't manage them both.
That's right.
It becomes overwhelming. You have no refuge.
Yeah.
You have no refuge. Yes. What a great way to say that. Yeah.
So on my calendar, I have a recurring appointment. It's from 1 to 2 o'clock every Friday. I take that hour for Muse Time. Now, I've never gotten to the point where I could do it every day, even though that mentor of mine said do it every day. But once a week, that is sacred time. And what I like about the fact that it's a recurring appointment is I will actually save up thoughts for that hour. And I'm at peace during the week, knowing I've got that reward at the end of the week.
Brian, where do you take that time?
Great question. I wish I could tell you I take it by the pool, but it's not open year round. Tony knows that I love my backyard and I love being in the water.
Gorgeous backyard.
But with that said, I generally do, believe it or not, do it in my office. But here's the thing. My chair spins around and my feet go up on the desk. I can't even see my monitor because if an email pops up, I'm going to look at it. So whatever you do, you got to remove yourself from the distractions. And by the way, my wife knows not to enter the office during that hour. She can come in any other time, 7 days a week, except for that hour. Okay. And she does that for me.
Love it.
Tell you what, that's a great tip. And I'm assuming I'm being rhetorical when I say it, until you experience that, you don't really recognize the impact of what that does.
Exactly. Oh my God. So there's another example of you got to do it. In my tradition, there's something called Nasa Vanishma, which is you understand something not by understanding it and therefore you do it. You understand it by doing it, and through the process of doing it, you gain greater understanding.
Yeah.
So do it. Don't question it. Just do it. And after you do it a couple times, you'll start to understand the value.
It's hard to summarize everything we learned here today. So the best advice is, if you're feeling stressed at work, give this episode another go. There's a lot in there to help manage that stress. Gentlemen, thanks for a great conversation that impacts every employee, every individual out there. You don't even have to be part of an organization to get some value out of this episode. Brian, thank you for sharing your experiences in life. Like I said, you've been a mentor to me for many, many years, and that's not going to stop. Craig, also great insights. Like I said, I could be a fly on the wall and say nothing this entire episode because I just love the information that we got out of this. Thank you both.
Thank you. Thanks, Brian.
Do you remember the movie Aladdin with Robin Williams? There was a character in that movie, like Zhivago or something. It was a bird. It was like a toucan or something, and he would constantly get smashed, and he was like, constantly being bruised. And he would say, with whatever energy he had, that which doesn't kill you makes you stronger. And then he'd pause and say, it usually kills you, of course. But the point is that when you get through something, you're so much stronger for it. The strengths of everybody in the team and bring them together, to use your physical example with your hands, is the idea of optimizing what everybody brings to the table. And what a hoot that is, what a lift that is when it actually works. And so as a leader,
I know we talked about it, and Brian, I don't know if you ever read the book, The 5 a.m. Club. Have you ever heard that one?
I've not.
It's
No.
I read it.
I'm getting my reading list this morning, by the way.
I'm writing it down. Yeah.
So it's it's about doing you first.